Today I'm sharing 3 ways to make die cuts pop. I'm also sharing how I fixed my mistakes. Hello there, Michelle Short here with Terrific Tags with Michelle. I'm here on the Altenew YouTube channel on the first and third Saturday of the month. So if you enjoy my videos, I'd love for you to subscribe. So let's get started. I'm using the Crispy Leaves die set today. There are 3 leaves in this set. I can just take those off of the packaging and I'm going to die cut them from Crafty Necessities cardstock. So I've got 3 shades here. I'm using buttercream for this set of leaves here, holding it down with some low tack tape. I'm then using Pastel Sunrise for this die, and then finishing off with a Coral Berry cardstock. So I've run those through my die cutting machine. I can now pop out the leaves from the negative, and what I love in particular about this die set is that it does add some indentations into the leaves, some added interest, which is really pretty. So I'm just going to be really careful here to pop out these leaves from the negative. Some of the stems are really very thin, so I'm just being careful not to rip those. And then for the first way of making die cuts pop is to add some sort of colour, or in this instance I'm using ink blending, but you could go in with lots of different mediums here. And it's just to add some interest and gradation of colour onto these leaves. I do want the original colour of the cardstock to show, but I do also want there to be some darker areas and some lighter areas, somewhat of a natural look. I mean, these colours might not necessarily be natural, but I do think they look really pretty in the end. So for this leaf here, I'm going in with Caramel Toffee, and I'm just adding a small amount of that on the sides of the leaves. I'm then going in with Cosmic Berry, and this is definitely more of like a raspberry colour, but I'm just adding a very small amount of that, and as it goes on top of the Caramel Toffee colour, it's just going to warm it up slightly. It is going to look a little bit red, but more kind of like a little bit of a maroony red. I think it turned out really pretty. I think this is my favourite of the leaves out of all of them. Even though these aren't colours I necessarily gravitate towards usually, I do really love how that one turned out. I'm then taking the Cosmic Berry ink again, and I'm going in and covering most of this leaf. I didn't actually want to cover as much as I did. You can only barely just see the colour of the cardstock, but again, I do really like how it turned out. I'm then going in with a micro blending brush. I have been using the mini blending brushes up to now, but I just wanted to add a little bit of the Midnight Violet colour, and that's just going to make it a little bit more of a purple shade. And then for this leaf here, I'm starting off with Blush Rose. I didn't really need to add this colour in, but I wasn't sure how dark it was going to end up against that cardstock. So I'm now going in with the next shade in the collection, which is Raspberry Sunset. And again, using that mini blending brush and just trying to focus the ink sort of on the edges of these leaves. They are quite small, these. I know the whole thing is a leaf, but I don't know if the separate pieces are called leaves. I need to learn a little bit more about these types of things, so I do apologise, I don't know what it's called, but I'm sure you understand what I mean. I then went in with the Cosmic Berry again, just to darken it slightly, and I'm now going in with that Midnight Violet again, just to sort of warm it up a little bit. This one did end up fairly similar to the one that I did just last, but they do have some slight differences. I then want to add a little bit more interest onto these, so I'm grabbing the metallic watercolour set and I'm going to add some water to the gold pearl colour here. Ideally, I would let the water sit for a little while to kind of penetrate into that pan and then mix it together, but I was being a little bit impatient, so I'm just mixing it here with my watercolour brush. And then I can pick up that paint, tap the brush to splatter that onto the leaves. I'm trying to sort of somewhat focus the splatter onto the darker areas of the leaves, just because that's going to show up the most. But I didn't really want huge splatters onto these. I wanted it to be fairly subtle, but I did just want to add some extra interest. That definitely helps make die cuts pop, I think. But there are some other ways that you can do it, which I will share a little bit later. But you can see there that that watercolor has really helped to just add a little bit of interest onto those leaves. So I'm going to set those aside to dry. I now want to work on another die cut. And this is kind of like my second way of making die cuts pop, and that is to mix and match die cuts and layer them up together. So I've taken one of the fun little envelopes dies and I've cut that from some 80-pound cardstock. I like using the slightly thinner cardstock for these envelopes. I find that they bend and sort of fold a little bit better. And I'm just using my bone folder there just to press down those edges. I wasn't sure at this point whether I wanted the envelope to be open or closed, so I've set that aside while I work on my tag. So I've cut 2 tags from Crafty Necessities Jet Black cardstock, and this is the third way that I like to make die cuts pop, and that is to use a neutral background. In this instance I'm using black, but you could definitely use white or a kind of grey or something like that as well. But I do again want to add some interest onto this tag. So I've got the Essential Textures Fine Wood Grain press plate. I have placed that into my Better Press machine, and then I'm just going to add the tag on top and then add a layer of cardstock. Because this cardstock is on the thinner side, I'm not going to get a great impression if I don't add a little bit of extra kind of like a shim basically. If I don't add enough pressure to this sandwich, I'm not going to get a great impression. So I've run that through my die cutting machine. I could definitely just do this with a die cutting machine rather than the Better Press system, because I'm not adding any ink to it, but it was just a little bit easier for me to do it in this way. So you can see now that I've got that lovely wood grain texture onto my tag. I have added an insert into this envelope. I end up taking this away, but for now it's there. You can kind of somewhat ignore it ish. I'm just figuring out here where I want the placement of my elements to be. So I'm kind of just sort of grouping them together. And then I want to cut my tag down because I felt that it was a little bit tall. So I'm just going to grab my pencil and then make a mark where I want to cut that tag down. And then I can chop that off using my mini guillotine. I can then add some glue tape onto the back of the tag, and I'm going to adhere it down onto another tag that I've also cut from Crafty Necessities Jet Black cardstock. That is going to give me some stability to the tag, but it's also going to make sure that it's nice and neat on the back if I want to write a personal message. So I'm just lining those up as best as possible, and then I can use my scissors to cut the other piece down. I am then adding that insert into the envelope, and this is where I went wrong. I thought that it would be quite nice to add some colour into the inside of the envelope, and I do think it's a good idea. I think the colour was just wrong and it was just not quite right for me, but at this point I'm just adding a little bit of glue tape onto the sides of the envelope, and then I'm just going to fold that in. Now thankfully I didn't add a huge amount of adhesive here and I managed to get that insert out, but you'll see that a little bit later. For now I'm going to adhere my leaves down onto my tag, and I've just got a piece of white cardstock behind. Because my mat is black, it's easier for me to see how much I'm kind of overlapping the edges of the tag just with that white cardstock behind, but I'll move that in a second. I can add some glue onto the back of this leaf here. I started off with the glue tape and then I went in with liquid glue. I found it just a little bit easier. And then I've got that time to sort of wiggle it in place as well. So just popping this one down here. and then I can pop up the envelope. So I'm going to use some instant dimension foam tape onto the back of that. Just going to cut a piece down. I can remove the backings off of that foam tape. And then I can adhere that into the centre of the tag. I am having it slightly towards the left hand side because I know that my sentiment is going to be on the right hand side. Before I go on any further, I'm going to add some black twine through the top of the tag. So just securing that at the front, and then I can tie that in a bow. And it didn't quite work the first time, so I'm just going to have a second attempt. I do tend to make my bows a little bit larger to start with, and then I can make them a little bit smaller. So just fiddling around with that for a little bit, and then I can cut those tails down with some scissors. And I do tend to try and sort of manipulate that twine to go where I want it to. I have then stamped and heat embossed a sentiment from the Sentiment Strips 2 stamp set, and I have cut it into 2 separate words. The sentiment does actually say sending healing hugs, but I wanted it just to say sending hugs. For the sending part, I don't want to add any foam tape onto the back of this because I didn't want the tag to end up too bulky, but I did still want there to be a difference in height between this sentiment and the envelope. So I'm going in with a couple of layers of that Crafty Necessities jet black cardstock, and that's just going to give it a little bit of dimension, but not as much as the foam tape would. So just cutting those down, and then I can use the liquid glue to adhere that down onto the envelope. So just trying to make sure that tag is as straight as possible, and then I can adhere that down. And then I've added some foam tape onto the back of the hugs word because that's going directly onto the tag, or the base of the tag I should say. I did then add in some things into the envelope. Again, you can completely dismiss that because I'm going to rip it apart in a moment, but for the time being I'm adding some champagne Stella sequins. Just adding a few different sizes and adhering those down with the perfect picker. So now at this point I realised that I didn't really like that yellow, so I'm just trying to be really careful here and remove the insert without damaging that envelope too much. Now thankfully I didn't add a huge amount of adhesive onto the back of that. I did cut a separate layer for the insert from white cardstock, and I thought that I would add that in, but once I took away the yellow insert I realised that actually there wasn't too much damage to the inside of that envelope, and any tiny little damage there is I'm going to cover it with these hearts. So these hearts are in the Fun Little Envelope set, and I'm just going to layer those up to give them a little bit of dimension, and I have added some ink blending with the residual ink on those brushes. So I used the Cosmic Berry and the Midnight Violet for that, and now I can just adhere them into the inside of that envelope, so it kind of looks like the hearts are coming out of the envelope, and I felt that that worked a little bit better for my design. Like I say, in isolation I think the insert with the yellow looked really pretty on the envelope, but it just didn't work for this design I don't think. So I'm just popping a little bit of liquid glue behind that envelope just to make sure that that sticks down really nicely, and I think I just about got away with ripping my tag apart and changing it up slightly. So if you ever feel like you need to do that, definitely give it a go rather than binning your entire project. Links to the products that I used will be listed in the description bar on YouTube and also over on the Altenew blog. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a wonderful day.
Wait, we have more where that came from. If you're after fabulous card making tutorials, you are definitely in the right spot. Our amazing design team create and upload fabulous video tutorials right to this YouTube channel. If you don't want to miss another amazing crafting tutorial, don't forget to subscribe and click that fun red button that you can see. Let's become paper crafting experts together.